Jono, thanks so much for joining us today on the Sporting Transition podcast. Really grateful for your time to kind of share a little bit about your story from elite rowing into the working world that also happens to be sales, so a really key part of today's podcast. But before we dive into it, we'd just love you to just give us the high level about you, who you are, what you do, what your sport was, and what company you work for at the moment.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mark, and thanks very much for having me on. So it's a topic that's sort of really important to me as well, because I got a lot from sport and then transitioning into business and sales in particular. I've got a lot out of it and seen the natural transition as well. So really nice topic to be talking about today. So yeah, a bit about me. I spent 7-8 years as part of the GB national team, culminating in a Olympic rowing representation in Rio. And then since leaving sport, I've worked in 2 different industries, both in the sales profession, but with medical devices, where I immediately transitioned into, and spending time in theatres with surgeons and talking to them about actually shoulder and elbow replacements was where I was focused. And then transitioned 5 years ago into tech sales and straight into Databricks, which at the time was a series, I think I joined at Series D, and now we're still private, but Series G. And I've been on a journey with them from somewhere around $100 million in revenue up to now like 2.4 billion in revenue as well. And then in the last 18 months, I've also transitioned into a leadership position for the first time. So I've worked as an individual contributor, high performance athlete, and now find myself in leadership. So that's me.
Cool, awesome, nice intro. And I took a quick note there around Series G. I can't remember that many companies who have gone that far down the funding routes, but I'll come to it a bit later. Actually, it's interesting what you've talked about. Tech company, high growth, lots of funding. I typically find a lot of athletes love those environments because it's kind of more funding, which typically means more opportunity. So I'll ask the question now. Was it quite a conscious decision to go after a tech company where you saw that money being raised? Because invariably, where there's funding, there's also career opportunity, which will suit you quite well. As probably quite a competitive person.
No, good question. I think for me, it wasn't necessarily chasing a dream of going into this really super high growth startup. And I think I was quite lucky with that, in that I wasn't chasing it. But what brought me to tech was, I think into data actually specifically. I'd been actually really interested within data as used in my sporting environment, and trying to understand that. And I'd also then gone into sales and medical device sales, and it was just a transition I wanted to make. And actually my wife is also in tech sales as well, so she was living that life and in it, and the high growth mentality of it. But I think also it was around tech is like the bleeding edge right now, and data. This was before generative AI, but even more so right now with everything that's taking off. And it was about being surrounded by high performance people, understanding sales processes, really looking at executing to the best, and then at the same time having fun around that.
Yeah, makes sense. And I spotted on your LinkedIn profile that when we go back to the very beginning, there was a stint at Blockbusters.
You found that one?
I did find it.
Yeah.
When you were the kid working at Blockbusters, what were your ambitions? What were you thinking? What were you hoping to get to in your future life? Or was it just a bit of pocket money on the side?
Interesting. I probably should remove that now. I don't know whether it's relevant, but it's funny. It does always come up, and I think I keep it there as well for a humility perspective, but also I think it is actually a good story for me as well to talk about. Was that for me was when you're rowing in the UK, it's not a full-time job. There is good funding at the top, but there's limited funding on the pathway to the top. So when I left school, I had an agreement with my parents that I could live at home for a couple of years, try the full-time athlete mentality. But what I also wanted to be was sort of starting to stand on my own 2 feet, and not just being an athlete all the time and then just going home and slogging out and doing nothing. So what I did is I took the part-time job at Blockbusters alongside my rowing career when I was 19, 20. And it was evening work, trying to raise just getting some money that I think I put towards boat blades and everything like that. Because I did have really supportive parents who I could have not had to do anything. But for me, it was about standing on my own 2 feet, starting that, and actually then like through the money that I was like doing that with and saving, then later I was able to like be in a position that I bought a house whilst I was rowing, again with my parents' support, but also working, seeing how we like would rent out the rooms to a couple of other rowers and stuff at the same time as well. So I think, I guess there's always a work ethic in me, but also it was about, I guess, early days of entrepreneurship, of like making sure that there is that way that I wanted to do the rowing, but I wanted to be able to fund that as well. So, and that was what I was doing to pay for that.
Yeah.
So and the nights and evenings spent working at Blockbuster, clearing the shelves and everything, it was all in the long-term ambition of getting to the Olympics, really.
Yeah, super interesting. And you hear this quite a bit, but when you obviously joined the Leander Rowing Club, how old were you at that point?
So I went straight from school at the age of, I would have been 18, leaving straight school, going to Leander. So
okay. And was it for you, a pretty big milestone in your rowing career, knowing that one of the best rowing squads in the UK have shown interest in you?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, it was. And like, I didn't leave school being a really top rower. I'd scraped into the national team. I was the spare, and then unfortunately one of the rowers in the training camps before the effectively junior Europeans got injured. I got then called up into being the spare. I got to go along with the team, and then on the weekend someone else got ill, so I actually got to race and experience the true racing. But the training, the lead up and being part of that team was really monumental in that. And I had a really supportive coach in Ali Brown Borlays, who had been a Leander rower and a national rower as well, so helped get me into Leander. But it was back then we had a 6-week trial when we first came, and it was like there were cuts. So every 2 weeks there were cuts, and it was like for that first 6 to 8 weeks you were like living life on the edge and like having to sort of prove your worth every day. And I'd come in of scraping into this junior team, and they're surrounded by guys who had gone and get medals at the European Championships and everything. And so it was a bit imposter syndrome spending time there. But again, there's the work ethic that I had, and like working with the coaches to understand where some of my weaknesses were, what I needed to improve, and then managed to stay and avoid the cuts and everything at each point, and then do my first season. And that again wasn't a great season, but I remember, what was this? It was winter of 2007. So it was the time just the year before the Olympics, and you're having people training for the Olympic season coming into the club, spending time there. So likes of like Mark Hunter, Pete Reed, some really big names who had won Olympic medals and were were winning world championships. And then you were getting to spend time around them and having breakfast and lunch. And again, it's that surrounding by A players and trying to understand what they were doing and then what you could learn from them. And so that first season was a huge learning opportunity for me. And I managed to scrape by each week, each day, and then get invited back for the next season as well, which was when I started really putting a lot of things together.
Yeah, interesting. And is it quite common for rowers to decide, because I think you chose not to go to university and instead go into essentially rowing and obviously some of the side hustles you've mentioned already. Is that quite typical, or in hindsight, do you wish you'd have maybe gone to university and tried to get into? I know hindsight is obviously wonderful, but
it is, I think we always wish that there's moments where we would wind back the clock. I think that's definitely one that I don't wish I had. Like, it was the best, I think, decision that I made. I don't think I would have got to where I did without being surrounded by Leander and being in that environment. It was a conscious decision to take a year out, and then a year turned into 2, turned into 3. And I think I left school a little bit probably burnt out from the academic side of things, a little bit, not over enthused with academia and college or university. There were opportunities to explore scholarships in the United States, which has got a really good collegiate system around rowing, like the Ivy League schools, the sort of West Coast schools as well, of Cal Berkeley, which we can come back to in a moment, because my company that I'm at, Databricks now, was founded at sort of Cal, and so there's like some overlap between the worlds as well. But so I think it was a conscious decision not to go. Do I wish I had? I think there's experiences that I've lacked. from not going, the social sides of it, some of the like growing up. But that was for me like where I took time to actually move out of home, go and actually move into a house. We had a few rows with us together and actually sort of grow up in that way separately as well.
Yeah. And is funding kind of enough to get you by? So you've kind of talked about blockbusters and other jobs. You'll probably have to sustain a little bit on the side. But is funding enough, or do you really need to work to get by as a rower who is still yet to make it?
As I alluded to, there's the funding side of things. When you get to the top, it's like lottery grants. It's a good, I'd call it a good living wage. You're not going to be able to retire off of it, but it's enough to be able to fund the rowing career and that lifestyle of training full time and being able to like go on training camps and not have to worry about that you've got a job to have to come back to or to maintain outside of it. But on the way up, it's really difficult. And you do see a lot of people either needing family support, and there's really supportive families out there, but obviously the opportunities for every family to support up and coming rowers is very limited. Obviously, it's a very affluent sport as well, which I think supports it, and I think that's relied upon, which is a shame, because then I think there's a disproportionate amount, and you see the stats of 50% I think of the rowing team were from a public or private school, and so that sort of I think skews the opportunities that people could get, especially at the top. But there is a good, I think there's a reasonable amount of funding on the way up, but most people that you've got doing it are doing some form of extra thing on the side to do that. And I think now there's more flexibility. I know people do sort of like online coaching for other people and things like that, and there's like ways of making money that are, I think, a little bit more remote, and then obviously that means that you're not having to get to an office and everything, and flexible. I think there were female rowers who were nannies, and the men were working in cafes in the town and everything like that. So they were very like sort of, I guess, 0-hour sort of contract jobs, which I do think there's an element of that which creates a rawness, which creates a drive, and then actually you're going into it that's creating the people that like really, really want it are going to make it for them as well. So yeah, there's a very much a balance in it all.
Do you think it helps balance your identity as well, in as much as you're having to work on the side, you're having to create a kind of another persona for yourself rather than just the athlete who's hopefully going to make the Olympics? Do you think it helped you a little bit from that perspective?
Yeah, well, I think that's the sort of balance question's an interesting one, because I think when you get to the top, it can be, this is your life. When you're leaving the house at 7, you're getting back in at 5, and all you've done all day is row. You go and spend time at Caversham, the National Training Centre, or down at Bisham Abbey, which was one of the land training facilities we used. And you're out the country on a training camp, and you're like living, breathing 24/7. And I think that can create a lot of pressure and a lot of like negative impacts into it. And I think there were definitely some instances where when you look at that and you're like overstepping too far into that world, like we all know we can work too much. You can spend you can spend every hour of your day, especially in somewhere like tech sales, you can spend every hour of your day responding to Slack messages or emails or customer requirements or needs from the team now as a leader. But actually, like, I went through a really good learning experience through my Olympic season, where I really sort of learned the power of the balance. And actually, I spent a bit of time back at Leander. So I'd gone to the national team in 2011 season. We hadn't had a great season. And actually, there were questions over certain people within the boat. I was one of those people that the national team selectors were questioning. And so I was sort of sent back to Leander from having got into the national centre, was training there for 4 years, and then to sort of be sent back for a couple of weeks as they were making space for other people to have a shot at the national team. And this was Olympic season. So it was a really, really hard period. But for me, that's where I was really actually going and thinking about, and that's when I first started thinking about opportunities actually outside, and is that my rowing career over? Because if I didn't make the Olympics, it sort of would have been. I'd have lost my funding. I'd have had to basically retire at that time. So I started considering what are my options outside of rowing at the same time as going down, is this something I'm really loving and can I make it work? And so I did two things. First off was I was like, right, I do really want to do this. I started thinking about the way I was going to approach the rowing training and a little bit more structure and like balance. And then the second thing to balance that, I was like, I started like getting my CV together, applying for jobs, speaking to people outside of it and really seeing what was going on. And actually, when I started doing that piece on the other side, it was that actually created the balance, that created the fun back on the rowing side of it as well. And I was able to both see, okay, I'm going to be employable once I leave the sport. But actually that was like a weight off my shoulders of then going, okay, well, actually I can go back into the rowing full time. And actually that increased my performance again. And I spent that 2 weeks in a pair with Johnny Jackson, who was one of the up and coming rowers at the time. And we then had like some really good sessions together at Leander, and then were invited back a couple of times to do pieces with the national team. And I think we were coming in the top 3 out of like the 6 or 7 pairs that were sort of training at that time, and you know, in all the pieces and things like that. So that for me was then like, okay, well, I'm having more fun doing this and that, so it's not all bad, and like everything will figure itself out. Massive turning point in Olympic season, and that was November, December of Olympic year. Sorry, of the Olympic season. So the selections sort of then took place in the March, April time the following year. But those sort of 4 or 5 months of doing that were really transformational, both for me career-wise and starting to think about that, but also with the rowing.
And how did that conversation go where you're kind of being sent back to Leander? Is it quite hurtful? Because obviously as a manager now, you're having to performance manage a lot of people. And I'm just trying to understand if there's any parallels between that experience and the way you performance manage people in your own business, because ultimately there's probably tons of difficult conversations. And I just wonder how brutal was that, and did it potentially burn a bit of trust with you after that conversation?
Yeah, I think, look, that's those sort of conversations that you have now are really difficult, like in a leadership position, like performance management and coaching, and they're really thinking about how people are going to be on the receiving end of it. Having been on the receiving end of it, I think I think there's 2 things. There's one, I think I wish I'd had a bit more clarity where the gaps were. When I was sort of told you're going back here, it was like I was a little bit lost as to why. And I think so. What I'm always conscious of is sitting down and explaining with people, like where I, you know, I'm direct. I'm a driven person. I'm quite direct in my leadership style and nature and things like that. So I don't hide that. I don't try and like, that's me as a person. And I think that's what gets the best out of me. I have high standards, and high standards of the people around me. So I don't try and hide that fact. But what I do try and empathize with is ensuring that everyone knows where the gaps are, where the improvement needs to be, and then that they're like, yes, they need to think about the plan themselves, but where the support is that me? Is that other cross-functional leaders? And how can they make that plan? And then really giving that clarity to go forwards. And I think that's the element that I wish that I'd had, because I didn't know what it was. And in rowing, it might feel like a simple sport. You put the blade in the water and you pull hard, sort of thing. There were different measures, and there were rowing scores on the water. There was seat racing, which is where you're moving people around the boats. There was ergo scores, which is land training. There's I think there's definitely obviously a team aspect to it, and those sorts of things. So it's very hard to select rowers. You don't just take the 4 best ergos and put them all in a boat and it goes well. But at the same time, that creates a little challenge between, like, when the selectors are looking at putting these boats together, it's like, how do you do it? And I think now that's looking the same with, like, how do you put teams together? You've put the 4 best people in a team, like 4 lone wolves. We all know that's never going to work. They're going to go off that left, right, and center. Collaboration is just not going to be there. And for high performance teams, you need everyone pulling in the same direction. And excuse the pun, but you need everyone working together. They need to be supporting each other and covering each other's gaps as well. Even when we're individual contributors, not everyone's the best at every area. So where are your teammates better than you? And that lifts everyone up. Rather, when you have like lone wolves together, what I find is then it's sort of a pushing everyone down, and like, okay, there's one person at the top, but the top's not as high. The peak's nowhere near as high. So yeah, I guess we're starting to come into some of the similarities across the areas and things, but there's a lot I've learned from sport, both from an individual contributor into sales, as well as then now in the leadership side of things as well.
Yeah, it's interesting the way you talk about kind of lone wolves and hunters. Did you typically find then that, imagine you had 5 jobs to fill, that you might feel that actually I don't want 5 rowers on my sales team because
it's an interesting one. I haven't yet hired I think most of my team are sporty and they've got they keep fit outside of it. I haven't actually hired someone who's like come from high performance sport into it. I think I'd love to see more people from sport coming into sales. I think we're starting to see that, and there's a couple of guys that are from the like Rio Tokyo cycles that have now come into it. Pete Lambert, Jack Beaumont, Alan Campbell are like all in sort of sales roles. But I think there's just such a natural transition into it. I think there's elements of in particular like team sports. So although, like I said, sales is an individual, we've all got individual targets. The best individuals are part of the best teams. And it's like, it was always one, like I've always had the mentality, and this was coming into Databricks. I remember the conversation with the hiring manager, who's actually still with the company, Craig. And I said, I want to come into an environment where I'm not necessarily the top, but I'm surrounded by the best people. And that then gets me to, I'd rather be the number 2 in the number 1 team than the number 1 in the number 10 team, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And that mentality, because you're going to learn from people around you, that team is going to be high performing, and how that team operates is what I really want to learn and understand and see and go forwards with. So I think
that's interesting.
Yeah, I think rowers make it. Like, we see a lot of rugby players in the profession. A lot of team sports are in sales as well. So I think there's that element, and there's a cross-functional team that you're working with. Like, especially in tech, you're always going to be at the hip with a technical counterpart that needs to help you sell the product as well.
Yeah. And how do you set the expectations with the team? Because in some ways, I really believe to be an Olympian or an international athlete, period, you kind of need to be unreasonable. You almost need to be balanced to the extreme of wanting something that you could almost say is unreasonable.
Yeah.
Yet in the workplace, you're going to be surrounded by people who have maybe been more balanced around everything else. They're not prepared to give up the social outings for sport because they value seeing friends in a weekend too much, or whatever it is. There's tons of examples. So have you had to rein yourself in a little bit to understand that what you put into the Olympics and international sport generally is not fair to have the same expectation of somebody who's going into sales, and pushing them to that same limit is maybe too much too soon? Or do you just push them as aggressively as you possibly can to push them to breaking point or deliver?
I think if you ask my team, they'll probably say that I'm pushing them too much sometimes.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's a fair question, because like I said before, like, I've got really high expectations of myself, and therefore I have high expectations of people around me. There's always going to be the times when I've you go that is unreasonable, like to do that. And I think, having been at the company as well for 5 years and worked up through it, being sold the product now, and then also working a team now that are selling it, I can also overstep the mark of like being the super AE or the player rather than the coach. And now I've got to always remember that my role is the leadership, and I'm developing the people. And I got that very wrong in the first 6 months, and I think every leader probably does, especially inside the same company. It's like, oh, this is the way I did it, this is the only way to do it. And now what I'm trying to always do is two things. Like, is one, obviously every person's different, and so they need to be having an individual style as much as you've got your expectations, your standards as a leader, you've got to coach to the individual. And I saw some of the challenges where coaching to one style within rowing, because it was like there's a team and then there's a national training center. It's like everyone does the same program, whereas actually not everyone had the same challenges. And like, some people were like weaker in the gym and some people were stronger on the ergo. And actually, should they have done different training programs? Or some people are more sprinters, and then some people need really large base aerobic capacity training. But everyone did the same program. So for me as a leader, like what I try and do is like ensure that, there's obviously team calls. You can't, be individual in every single call with the team. But in my one-to-ones, I have different styles with people. So, and then it's also about different situations. So then everyone's like got a different, even your top people are going to have different areas where they need direction over coaching and autonomy. And so trying to coach to those and I guess lead and manage the different situations as well as the different people is what I'm always trying to do. But I'll always, we're human. We'll always get it wrong. And, I'd always try and strike that good balance between it.
Well, when did you decide on that route into management then, as opposed to an individual contributor? Because it sounds like you were doing really well. At what point did the thoughts trigger in your head that, okay, now management's maybe for me? Was it an experiment? You want to try it out? Or was it actually something you really felt like, no, I am a manager. I know how from rowing or from whatever else, the management's something you'd be good at and wanted to be involved in. Just curious to know how you decided on that career path, because it's quite an important kind of decision.
Yeah, I think I'd always I was a coach as well as a rower at some that was one of the part-time jobs I did on as I was rowing as well. I did a little bit of coaching on the side, and always liked the idea, like the way of giving back. And when I was like rowing with that and like the coaching side of things as well, that was always really fun. And to see people grow and progress. And like one of the people that got into rowing, like went and won the Junior World Championships, and did really well. And then another one went off and did one of those scholarships that I was talking about at Harvard and stuff. And like they're seeing them do that and their journeys, like, and being a little bit of that journey was really impactful. I think I've always had that itch to be involved in it, but obviously you've got to build your own career, you've got to build your credibility and your own success and prove it. It was one of the reasons I moved into tech sales. There's more opportunities to sort of build and grow a career and everything. So again, I wanted to progress within the company. It wasn't that I'm going to go into leadership from day one. And there was a year before I was considering it, and that would have been too early, like in hindsight. And I went into like more of a strategic account manager role, leading a cross-functional team, but not having like direct reports and everything. And so setting a vision, a strategy, and and executing all of that with the team. And that was a good hybrid. A bit of being like a senior account executive, but also having a cross-functional team, and in ways was actually harder leading because you were having to beg, borrow, steal resource, set a vision and make sure those people wanted to like work with you rather than having to work for you. And then actually but I was working with my manager at the time that like leadership is still something I do want to do. And it was halfway through that year that I wanted to start exploring it and seeing roles that came up and stuff. Because I was giving had 3 or 4 mentees at the time. And so I was spending time with them, giving back and like, seeing the results. And I actually figured out like we closed a really large deal at the end of that year as an account team. And that was really positive, but that felt more of a relief at the end of it. And whereas when I was like mentoring and seeing the development of the individuals again, that I got more success out of them closing deals, and that more feeling of like, oh wow, that's really good. And like, again, I was obviously only having a small little part, but that having that small part to them having some really good success. And so that was when I sort of knew the tipping edge, because I'd spoken to one of the hiring managers before, and he'd said, look, are you ready to sort of, give it for your team? And you lose that. And I think that year before I wasn't, but by the time I'd done that year and done some larger deals and had some bigger impact as an individual myself,
Mm.
I think I then was ready to take it. And so, yeah, I'm really liking the team and building the culture side of things, and really working with them on their individual challenges, but also like coaching from their strengths as well. What are they good at, and what can we do more of the good things? And so finding ways for them to share that out across the team and build themselves up.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's very similar transition to I had actually in terms of, you know, what's next after being a single individual contributor, because I felt like that buzz was no longer there. It was more the relief. And I think I started feeling that joy again when I saw other people closing deals.
Yes.
And that's when I realized actually it was definitely the right time to walk away. How do you build around trust with the team? Because as a rower, you've probably been quite meticulous, a lot of control, you know how to bring the best out of yourself. And now you move into management where you obviously have to trust people a lot more and maybe release. So you've kind of talked about being sometimes the manager who maybe kind of gets too involved, or, kind of parachutes in with all the experience of having sold the product. Let me show you, I'll do it. How do you kind of juggle that and say, look, I'm trusting you to get this done, knowing that ultimately it's your job on the line as well, that as a sales leader, if they don't perform, it's on you, right? It's not always on them.
Yeah. So I think that there's two ways that I sort of look at that. One is around, like, for me, trust is there already. Like, so it's a given to start with. So for me, trust is there, and then it's eroded. Like, it's eroded very quickly if it goes. But for me, I don't need to have someone like earn my trust. Like, I'm quite trusting in that and seeing it. But what I'm looking for in that time is, like, communication and things like that, and going like, things are going right. This is where we're up to. Like, we're making progress, like, on various different areas. And in sales, it's like updates on where we are, and in the deal cycles, or working with customers and everything. And if there's that level there, for me, it's like that's the number one thing of, like, keeping up with it. I think obviously it's then, if I'm then having to sort of come to them a little bit too much, that's where it's starting to get questioned. But I think for me, it's like, it's definitely a given, and then it can be lost very quickly, I think, with that way, and then obviously it's really hard to maintain it, or recoup it. So that
sounds like communication. So it sounds like communication is quite a big part of it. If people communicate with you, let you know what the status is, what's happening, what they're happy about, unhappy about, it at least allows you to understand and know what might be a challenge or something to help resolve, rather than be blindsided by it. Well, why don't you tell me that?
Communication is that most important thing, because even if you're not on track, if you know where you're not, then we can do something about it. And I see that's the responsibility of, like, the people closest to our customers, is seeing those challenges, not having to do the correction or the risk management or whatever it is, but understanding where they are, and then let's work as a team, and let's get round together and see how we can overcome those challenges, overcome the hurdles. But if you don't understand where the gaps are in it, that's going to be a real challenge for anyone else to come in there that's further removed. You got experts in every area, especially we've got a company like that's really well funded, and you've got the backing of it, people you've got experts that can do anything, and they're so much experience. So it's getting the right person in that situation. But that's where I see, like, account executives' main job is like that orchestrator. And the best account executives out there are the ones orchestrating. They're the ones that have got the humility to go, I'm not the best at every area, but I'm going to be the best at getting the right people in front of the customer at the right time. And then they're the ones that are like grinding away and building networks and everything, and they can then rely on those people to come in and do that. And then it's no surprise to anyone else around them why they're executing, because everyone wants to work with them and build them up.
Yeah, that makes sense. And conscious of time, so two more questions for you. Well, one is about that initial kind of transition away from rowing. Were you aware of how to brand yourself as an international athlete? Did you know what to put in your CV? Did you know what people would be attracted to?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it was hard to start with. Like I think the CV in the first instance got ripped up about 4 or 5 times because you think you're talking about the right things, and like medals won or like accolades and those sorts of things. But actually, when you come down to it's two. There were there were a couple of things that I was thinking about, which is like the intrinsic values of like what I hold in high regard, and obviously the skill set that I've built. And so I think there's three, and it was really nice when I came into Databricks that this really aligned with my manager Craig that I mentioned before, which was like values of like honesty, humility, hard work. And so you can show those through a CV, and like what you're doing, and like it's also what you're not talking about as well, like and like you're not putting up like your some of the best ever metrics right at the top. You're allowing those to be you come through. It's like what it shows what you value, and through that I think then it comes down to the skill sets that you've learned. And for me it's around like that intrinsic drive, that I think the like learning from failures. And I think if you've seen, I don't know if you've seen like Roger Federer's talk to, I think it was like Harvard or Princeton last summer around like, the graduation speech. And he was like, #1 world's best ever tennis player. And he was like, I lost more points than I won. And the same with Michael Jordan, how he talked about how much he like, how many he scored so many points because he missed so many points. He wasn't afraid of trying and failing, but learning. Failure wasn't failure. Failure was an opportunity to learn. And so I think there's those pieces, and how you get that out in your CV and from speaking to people is what people in business are going to really care about. Because not if someone's just succeeded in their life, they're not going to be able to be successful like in a profession like sales, because we know that you go in and then the number of knockbacks, like from a cold call, like getting hung up on, like but getting like renegotiations at the far end of it. You've got to go back and go like you've got to have that resilience to like keep going back and like drive it forwards, because you'll get the number of times you get told no is incredible, even internally. Like when you're trying to get people to support it, it's like no, but you got to have that resilience to go, let's figure out another way to get the support that we need to do this. So I think it's the skill sets like that like how have you got there, and then it's the journey that you've got there. And so that's why from it was funny, like I think I've removed it now from my CV, the blockbuster piece, but in the early days I had that on there. I was a little bit proud of like doing that and working alongside it, because it could speak to a story around what I was doing, and that was me. So I think again, thinking about all those things that you've done outside of just being an athlete is going to be what's going to round you out. And then people are going to see, even if you're coming into it later, because a lot of athlete transitions are later in life. We're all going to be concerned at the 27 to 30 of like how employable might we be. But actually the skill set that you've got, I see it as I'm just having a second career off the back of like a sporting career to start with, and then I'm just transitioning into something different.
No, that makes sense. And I guess the other question I was going to ask is around the, you've obviously done keynote speaking, after dinner speaking, professional coaching, elite coaching. Is that something you wanted to do and would have loved to continue doing, or is it something that actually is just hard to hold, a high brand value in rowing, even as an Olympian, when there's other Olympians who may be also wanting to do a similar thing? Or was it you just decided, actually, I just don't enjoy this enough, and it's time for a new horizon?
So look, I think that there's a natural window that there's always going to be of interest off of that, and you can see that off like the Paris Olympics and like the recognition that people get and everything. I think there's two things to that. One, that I did a few. They're very lonely because it's just you traveling and you're meeting loads of different people. Great, but then it's just you there with 200 other people. You don't know. You might know one person who's got you the gig, and you're like having chat. That you sat there at awkward dinner, like having that, and it's like get up on stage, and like everyone else is like drunk around you, and you're sweating, and then you talk about yourself for 45 minutes, and for me, I wanted to come in and like build a career and like get involved in the company and stuff, and like sales is an opportunity there to like you like high performance, use skill sets that you've got like around, meeting performance targets and overachieving against them, and then, getting paid really well for doing that. And that's the difference that I had in rowing as well. Like, you weren't getting paid for doing those and having those qualities. It was about the performance, but there were no win bonuses or like, prize money. But actually now within sales, it's like, oh right, if I do a really good job, I'm going to get some nice reward out the back of this. And actually, that, alignment to being driven and performance and, and your qualities, making that up and then getting paid really well, having a career and developing that, and then also being part of a company that actually values those things and then can build you as an individual. That's why I sort of didn't continue doing too much of the like, individual stuff around that as well.
Yeah. No, that makes complete sense, and actually answers my question anyway, which was going to be why choose a career in sales. But I think we've kind of touched on it in various ways. Yeah, just one quick fire question. What were your ambitions? When you're in primary school and the teacher says, who wants to be a doctor, who wants to be a pilot, put your hand up. What would be in your hand growing up?
I'd love to say as be Olympian and a salesperson, like, but no one ever says those are two professions. No, the Olympian dream is like, that, but I wasn't that good at like primary school and that. I think for me, I was like, my dad was in the Air Force, the forces, so I was maybe looking at like, doing something similar, the army or Marines or something. I think if I hadn't found rowing, that might have been something I actually would have looked at doing. I was doing like scouts and things like that. So yeah, it was probably that some profession like that, which I don't think will be a surprise to many people in my team if they watch this, or people who know me. They'd be like, yeah, that would have aligned.
Yeah, cool, awesome. Well, I'm conscious of time and you've got a hard stop. So Jono, thanks so much for your time today. Really, really appreciate it. Yeah, really lovely learning about your journey, your story, and yeah, hopefully it inspires a couple of people to think differently about what may be available to them after their, whether it's rowing or any sport career. And really grateful for your time.
No, thanks very much, Mark. And if anyone ever wants to reach out on LinkedIn, please feel free to. Happy to connect.